Welcome to the Horizon Lab podcast. Today we are featuring Chris Fry. Chris Fry has been on the cutting edge of cold email for a long time. He was one of the first adopters to do AI personalization at scale. Now, this was before GPT came out. And right now, he's currently doing amazing things in the cold email space. So, without further ado, welcome, Chris Fry. Hey, Chris, welcome to the podcast, man.
Hey, thanks for having me. Super excited to be here. Appreciate it.
Yeah, I appreciate having you on as well, man. So tell me about your diverse career. You do AI, you do outbound, you do some machine learning stuff. What is it that you do, and how did you get into it?
It's a good question. It's been a meandering journey, I think, but I originally started off as an SDR a long time ago now, almost 10 years ago. I was doing a lot of cold calling. This is back when the traditional Salesforce predictable revenue model still applied. And after that, I did a couple stints in growth marketing, hired some SDRs, managed some SDRs, worked for a lot of early stage startups internationally, actually, as well as in the US. I eventually got a job with a venture capital company in San Diego that was more of like an incubator. So they raised money, they started and were trying to grow 6 or 7 different early stage machine learning based technology companies. And most companies hire a couple growth people for one company. They hired one growth person for several companies, and so was in an interesting position where really needed to rely on automation and working smarter versus harder, and thinking about some non-traditional approaches for growing revenue, for getting more leads. Led to a lot of automation. I was surrounded by data scientists and really, really brilliant machine learning folks for a couple of years, and I think a lot of that stuff rubbed off on me and started dabbling in my free time. One thing led to another, and we put together some pretty interesting systems that helped grow those portfolio companies. Then spun out my company out of that group, essentially servicing other early stage companies and helping with sales automation. Nowadays, we do performance based lead generation as our core offer. Done a lot of different projects in really hardcore automating of CRM stuff. So it's like some RevOps automation, some intelligence type stuff. Now I spend a lot of my free time playing with new OpenAI toys and other big LLM providers, and really trying to go down this path of building agents for every position, and eventually, doing some seriously interesting automation around potentially automating an entire organization. It's a little bit pie in the sky at this point, but I think every day we get a little bit closer to that. So
That's interesting, man. Yeah, definitely. So you mentioned some non-traditional ways of growing revenue, man. What were those non-traditional ways, if you don't mind sharing?
Yeah, I can give you some examples. So, nowadays everyone has Clay, which is a great tool, a really easy way to apply specific prompts and run agents on a CSV. Essentially, is what Clay is, right? We were doing a lot of the stuff in Airtable 3-4 years ago, and but a lot of the playbooks that I think people take for granted were pretty new back then. So for instance, we were working with a company called Kazoom, and they sold a distributed computing software platform that helped provide more computing power for really tough, complex tasks like academic research or simulation or AI and machine learning. And so we did some non-traditional things, one of which was scrape all of the archive papers, which is a science STEM research repository for all these academic researchers that are doing ML research and doing AI research and doing all kinds of scientific research. We scraped all their papers down. We pulled out all the emails from there, all the names and the impact of their research. And then we started writing personalized emails to those researchers asking if they wanted to sign up for Kazoom, essentially, and get more computing power for their research. And that was, to this day, one of the more successful campaigns that we ran. So I think personalization at scale is a big buzzword these days. I think it's become almost commoditized, or at least it's kind of like an arms race. People are kind of, they get a new toy, a new tool, and then the personalization just gets better and better, and everybody's competing against each other on that. But back then, that was fairly non-traditional when it came to messaging, or would have taken you a long time manually. We did a couple other things around LinkedIn automation and creating these big swarms of LinkedIn accounts that were all controlled in one spot. But that, again, that's a little old news relative to what's out there today.
Yeah, so let's talk a little bit more about what's out there today. How has the industry changed from back then 4 years ago, and it was like you guys were one of the first early adopters of some of these, techniques, to now, like what are you seeing on the cutting edge?
I think the big force underneath all this is the price of intelligence. Before 3 years ago, we were running everything on Curie and DaVinci, the models that OpenAI had released, and those were really cutting edge, but it was costing you 25 cents per row just to write a single personalized line. Now that cost is 0.00025. Right, you look in Clay, you look at your usage, it's a 1,000th or 1/100,000th of the cost, and so that's a big unlock that allows you to do a lot more things. And I think platforms like Clay have allowed non-technical people to really harness that drop in the cost of intelligence and start to apply it in all kinds of different areas. So when I look at the landscape of what's out there, I mean, you kind of have this like raw intelligence, very cheap, very affordable, very, very effective now. There's a middle layer of platforms and service providers that allow the distribution of that intelligence into useful contexts like go to market, like sales and lead generation and cold email. And then, that allows the layperson to get access to this stuff. So Clay, I think, is a great one. Clay lets anyone who's not an engineer become a go-to-market engineer. On the content side, there's a lot of really interesting growth tools out there around repurposing content, around sharing content, engaging with content, tracking content. That's an area that we definitely want to focus a little bit more on in 2025, where we've mainly been an outbound shop, and that's obviously where I come from. But you started a podcast too, so obviously content is on your radar as well. I think there's a lot of interesting applications and tools that can be applied in that space. To focus on cold email specifically, I think tools like Smart Lead instantly that allow you to scale horizontally across emails, always a winner. Intelligence and data providers specifically, going back to the cheap or the affordability of LLMs, you now have these data tools that can give you data, bespoke data, customized data that you never had access to before. It's not in any database, and it was not cost effective for any data provider to provide it to you because it might be so niche, right? So like we just started working with a great client right now, actually, that sells a data product in the talent intelligence space. And what they do is they scrape LinkedIn, they scrape all these other data sources that everyone has access to, and they run it through a bunch of LLMs that can create new data fields, new tags, new insights into these. Particularly, they focus on executive search, and they can really drill into things like, was this executive involved in specific projects at this company? Yes, no. Or they can use LLMs to calculate the number of years of experience that this particular executive has across different industries, right? And those industries can be customized. And what you end up with as a consumer is a very tailored, niche, specific data set that you never had access to before because it was so niche or so customized, or just it would require a room full of humans to go get the data for you. So data platforms like that, I think, that's the future as well. And then, of course, the implementation platforms like Clay, like Smart Lead, to actually act on that and get that into the prospect's inbox.
Nice. So what do you think separates the layman person who can now be his own engineer using Clay, using Smart Lead, using Apollo, maybe some of these other intelligence platforms that have better data than Apollo, and the real pros?
That's a good question. I have to think about that one. I think democratizing access to this stuff has unlocked a lot of potential for people. I think it's also created a lot of noise, right? So it is super important to define carefully, where it's appropriate and where it's not appropriate. I think if I were to think about true experts in this space, it's people who have internalized these tools and their capabilities. And so they're operating from a place of intuition and not from a place of, oh, this influencer told me I should be writing this personalization, and I'm just going to spam this in every single campaign that we run, right? I think that's where you get into a situation where you send 100,000 emails and they all have very similar not really relevant personalization just for the sake of personalization, maybe that's actually detrimental to your campaign. And so people who have internalized this stuff and kind of have their finger on the pulse of where the market is can make these judgment calls a lot better. And they can say, hey, look, Clay is great. Clay's fantastic. Personalization is great. Let's use it like a scalpel and not like a machine gun or like a hammer, and use it for the right purposes and in the right places. That's the first one. I think copywriting is another area where you can separate the wheat from the chaff. And this is so offer dependent, of course, on if people are buying what you're selling. If people are hungry for the solution, you can get away with a lot of things. But if you're in a saturated space, or if you're operating in a, with constraints, let's say maybe your offer is not super competitive, you really have to refine the copywriting. Clay can't really help you with that. No matter how many fancy tools you have, you still need some go-to-market strategic sense. I'm not sure if that answered your question.
No, it definitely did, man. It's very, very interesting.
What do you think?
Yeah, I mean, I think operating off of intuition is a really, really interesting one. I think having better access to better data and not traditional sources of data. The people that I see killing it, they don't use like Apollo as much. They use it more as like waterfall enrichment more than anything. But it's not like, oh, I'm grabbing a list off of Apollo and then scraping their websites or whatever, or their LinkedIn. And then, but like just a group of people, like maybe they find a class that everybody's attending and then they scrape the people of that class. Which brings me to a really interesting question, man. So do you think that volume play versus strategic low volume play, like what would you play more? And do you find that maybe the low volume play is slightly better if you're very tactful about how you do it?
I think it depends on your goals and what kind of company you are. Or, are you a salesperson at a big company? Are you running a team of salespeople at a medium-sized company? Are you an agency? Is your market large? Is it small? Is your price point big or in the middle or low ticket? Right? These are all variables that can affect that. So I think it's more nuanced than just, yes, go high intent, low volume, or go massive, maybe personalized, barely personalized, but a very, very high volume. For us, I mean, I can only speak to the agency side. I mean, we run an agency, we're performance based. So volume is a super critical component of that, because just the way that we price it, it incentivizes us to send more emails. Mm-hmm. Now, in my experience, that is always aligned with the client's goals. In 99% of cases, if you just send more emails, your client will make more money and you'll make more money. That's, I think, a pretty good rule. Now, there's always a balance between, I think of what I tell my team actually is when we onboard a client, we try to pull their entire market and we understand what the edges are of that market, how big it is, what the various subgroups are within that. And we try to get started with what we call evergreen campaigns first, which is high or at least above average volume, some level of personalization, just to get going as quickly as possible, because you learn a lot from just sending the first couple emails, and you'll get responses back. They'll tell you things that you didn't know before. You'll get relative performance data that'll tell you things that you didn't know before. There's a lot of signals that you get back, of course, just by starting. So we always try to get started as quickly as possible. At the same time, and in parallel, we're always working on finding that perfect intent-based campaign where we just scrape just the right signal and find just the right people, and we say just the right thing at the right time, and the conversion rate is astronomical. For us, it's a blend. The short answer to your question is it's always a blend for us. We try to get started with higher volume stuff first. We rotate into intent-based campaigns, but I don't think you can rely exclusively on low volume trigger-based intent campaigns. It's very market dependent. It's very offer dependent. Take something like branding agencies, right? Like web design. They're selling $300,000 websites to enterprise customers. Where's the signal there? I mean, there's maybe one or two signals that you could scrape for around hiring or, open positions or whatever. But it's really hard to tell when a company is trying to go through a rebrand, because you really have to catch that company 6 months ahead of their rebrand initiative, right? You don't really know. So you would launch maybe 1 to 2 of these low volume campaigns, and that's probably not going to give you the type of results that you're looking for. Whereas if you did a much larger campaign, just going for demand capture of that 1.5-2% that are in market right now that have initiatives, you might be a lot more successful, right? Contrast that with a very expensive product with a very small market, you maybe don't want to burn that whole TAM list by spamming them. If you have 2,000 accounts in your patch and maybe it's enterprise customers, so maybe it's 10 to 100 contacts per company, that's a finite universe, right? So you want to be a little more strategic around that. You can afford to be more strategic, I think, because the ticket size is so much larger. So it depends, I think, is the short answer.
Do you find that since you're doing performance based that you're a little bit more selective with the clients and the offers that you work with?
We miss the mark sometimes on the qualification process during the sales process, but it's very important because as a performance-based agency, you can really start to spin your wheels a little bit with bad offers, clients that, have tried 5 agencies and it's still not working, right? We're good, but we're not that good. We can't solve, we're going to be doing a lot of the similar things that 5 other companies have been doing, right? And we're upfront about that. So we try to qualify people like that out. But honestly, you never know until you send the first emails. I mean, we definitely had offers where we took them on. I wasn't optimistic and we smashed it out of the park. And we also had offers that we thought were going to be really, really good. We had a lot of good ideas and nobody was biting for whatever reason. So you just got to send emails.
Interesting. And you said now you're starting to pivot a little bit more into content. Can you tell me why that is and what the strategy there is?
Yeah, I mean, our core agency offer will not change. I mean, we're gonna do cold email through all of next year. I think internally we've been focusing. We're starting to ramp up around content, putting some systems into place. Don't want to automate the whole thing, of course, but there's a lot that you can do to help enable the content creation process and repurpose things and provide ideas and even do some basic script writing for certain channels or certain platforms. So we're looking at this stuff. I'm a systems person, so we've actually built most of the system first before really pumping out a lot of high volume content. So we're about to start ramping this up in Q1, and hopefully, if everything goes according to plan, we'll be able to push a lot of content out. But I don't know if we're going to roll it out to clients just yet. But again, I'm always coming from the perspective of using automation to productize services, and content marketing as a service seems like a very ripe opportunity for creating a pretty interesting high margin business. So.
Interesting. And so what do those systems kind of look like?
I mean, from a technology perspective, it's all LLM based. We put everything in Airtable, but high level, I mean, tracking different content formats across channels, different post types, creating prompts that are specialized in writing or creating each one of these, chaining together a bunch of APIs, third-party APIs and stuff that we might build internally to, take, for instance, a long form audio. Like I'll give you a great workflow that I found really effective. So I like to go for walks in the morning. So I'll sit there and I'll record a voice memo on my phone for 15 or 20 minutes, just spitballing about a topic. When I get home, I'll airdrop it into my Google Drive Google Drive folder on my laptop. And then there's a series of automations that will suck that up, transcribe it, pull the content out, spin it into like 15 different tweet threads, write 3 different LinkedIn posts. We've kind of chained it together with all of the other recorded content that I've done internally in our team and externally, and other voice notes and content pieces to do almost like a RAG based system, or like a retrieval augmented generation based system, where rather than just relying on the knowledge that's stored inside of GPT-4 about cold email and Clay, which is probably pretty limited, we can instead go in and look at the 950 recorded training calls that we have with our team and start to pull out really niche specific content that is, we know it's world class and high quality because it's the stuff that we're working with every day, and we operate in this space. It's not just like GPT garbage, right?
Yeah.
So that's an example of one. I think there's a lot of other interesting stuff around like multimedia, right? I mean, we saw Sora just came out, the video generation tool. You have better image generation pretty much from every single major cloud or AI provider. I think content repurposing is basically automated, or the raw materials are there to take a podcast and just completely slice it up into a million different pieces and post it everywhere and have it be correct and require minimal human intervention and editing, right? That I see that so clearly. It's just, I don't know if there's tools out there that are doing that already. I think like Opus Clip and some other tools are
Riverside
doing
kind
something
of does
similar,
that.
but
Yeah, the only thing I find is the quality of the shorts could definitely be better. Like I've done a little bit of testing on like AI versus video edited content, and I find that the video editors tend to win, bro. If you have a really creative, really talented video editor, you'll definitely get higher higher retention rates on your videos. That is
yeah,
true, but it is catching up though. It is
right.
catching up. And in terms of time though and scalability though, it's like chicken and egg, right? It's like, well, if you post 100 pieces of content versus like only posting 20, yeah, that 20% might perform better, but are you really reaching more people? You know,
Right.
is there more retention at the end of the day? So that's a really, really interesting question. So what prompted this pivot into the content game?
I think about it both in terms of how we acquire customers internally for our agency and also kind of medium and long term benefits that you can get from a personal brand. And for me personally, there was reasons across all of those. So, in the short to medium term and just focused on the agency, we do outbound internally very well. We can scale it, but it's time to start laying the foundation for a second channel, especially when it's a channel that can take a long time to mature and really start to build that flywheel. So we want to start it at the beginning of 2025 so that by the end of 2025, we are getting a consistent percentage of our MQLs and SQLs through organic inbound traffic of some kind. So that's the first reason. I think the second reason is, this whole AI thing moment that we're in right now it's a really tectonic shift, I think, in the way that business is done. It's opened up a lot of opportunities for new applications and new products and new ways of doing things. And I'm an idea person, and I'm constantly thinking about new ideas, new businesses, new offers. And I think having a brand, this is separate from the agency, but having a brand where people know you, they know what you like, what you like to talk about, what you're interested in, they've consumed your content. It just filters. It's a filtering mechanism for people that you could potentially want to work with in the future, who maybe want to come work at your companies. And it sidesteps a lot of the like risk and time and all these things of just attracting people into your orbit. And I think I think Hormozy had talked about this as well, and actually I saw it firsthand with Eric Noslowski, and him and I were chatting, and, you get people who have watched 10, 20, 30 of your videos, and they'll just come up to you and they're like, I want to work with you.
Yeah.
Like you don't have to do the whole vetting thing. They're trained because they've watched every piece of content that you put out and that you know exactly how to slot them in and vice versa. That's incredibly valuable. I mean, so I see the medium and long term value accrual that can happen, and I think I finally internalized it, and finally am getting motivated around like doing it. But it's a gargantuan task. You run a
Yeah.
business too. You're always fighting fires. It's hard to sit down and like talk into a phone or talk into a camera and with no immediate
Yeah.
return.
It's a
You know what I
full-time
mean?
job, bro. It's a full-time job.
Full time.
Like
Yeah,
I put aside all my focus basically onto this. So putting out all the fires is extra, right? So if you think
yeah,
about that, it's like a lot of people don't put the full-time work into it, but if you really want to create growth, I mean, that's where it's at.
for sure. Yeah, and
So
it's a good opportunity sometimes when you devote fully to a project that is adjacent or is not fighting fires. The fires start to get out of control, and when the fires get
yeah,
out of control, that's when you realize what they are and where there was little smolders, and you go in and fix those things and hire people to do it and
yeah,
solve the problems rather than you just defaulting to like fixing it yourself, which I think has been a big
yeah.
challenge for me personally. It's just
No,
not doing it
it's
myself.
hard. It's hard taking your hands off, man. It's like getting a team in place. Like we just recently got a project manager like last April, right? And so we've been taking our hands off with like certain things and having it's like, yeah, I know the answer to the question. I know why this problem is happening, but like I can't give the answer because I need him to come up with the answer himself, right?
Right.
And so going through that process also is a little bit stressful, like on our end, because it's like shit. Like if I'm not like I'm watching him make mistakes sometimes, and I'm like, bro, like nah, man, like, but there's nothing you can do because and in the end, if you truly want to grow, you have to kind of let go of that, right?
Exactly.
Yeah.
It's a good learning exercise.
Yeah, man. So I always end the podcast with kind of fun questions. So if you could automate any part of your personal life, what would that be, bro?
Ooh, good question. I mean, I move around a lot because we travel. The last couple of years, we've been semi-nomading around in different countries for 3 to 6 months at a time, and I feel this overwhelming burden of logistics around planning how we're going to get to places, looking up bag fees and check-in times and booking hotels and comparing prices and doing research and this, that, and the other thing. And thank God, I have wonderful girlfriend that does a lot of this stuff, but still between the two of us, it's an overwhelming amount of logistical stuff. And I'm so not a like logistics person. I don't take pleasure in just planning these little tiny things. I'm very much up here. So I think
Yeah.
one thing, if my dream is to have this personal agent that could do all these things, right? It's equipped with web research tools. It can go and navigate, computers and browsers and plan all this stuff. And
Buy the
I actually
tickets
think
and just get it done.
and just get it done. Yeah. And present me with options and a plan and evidence on both sides. And I can just make a decision and it's the right one, right? Or it's a good plan. I think we're not too far away from that, which is incredibly exciting. That'd be the one thing.
Right on, man. And if anybody wanted to reach out to you, how would they be able to do that?
You can reach out to me on X. I also have a YouTube channel as well. And then the YouTube channel is Chris Fry _ AI.
Right on, man.
If you need lead gen, you can talk to us at hyperscaleleads.com.
There you go. Hyperscaleleads.com, guys. Right on, Chris. Well, hey, I appreciate the time, and we'll see you next time.
Sounds good. Thanks for inviting me on. Appreciate it.